Strings of Malice, Book 1. Snowflake in an Alley. An old Mother Nonsense story. Chapter 26. Recovery. Awetdal 28th Dorum. 2 weeks later, Irinka walked back into the small inn they had been staying at, Outfleak walking slowly beside her. The pup had been taken very well care of by the sweet vet the coachman had suggested, and the doctor's now entirely empty coin purse. She was still a little slow, but the vet had explained that, being the kind of magical creature she was, Outfleak was now beyond her help. Being near the one she was bonded to would heal her up the rest of the way. At least she was out of immediate danger. With a strict diet of only red meat, small grain seeds and water for the next week, Irinka had been assured that her little omen would be ill no longer. The girl couldn't deny that Outfleak wagging her tail at the sight of her had made her feel better than she had since coming to Kaleka. Maybe she had been trying to do too many things, but her friends had taken much longer than the mouse thought they would to come out from under whatever hold the White Rose had had on them. Especially the doctor, which had been strange because he had seemed to get better, only to get worse again. Irinka suspected that the magic used on him must have been the strongest because he was also magical. She had wondered why the vampire had never tried to control her the way she had the others. Nimue was clearly so broken from losing her connection to her deity that she wasn't a threat. But Irinka? She knew she had been difficult, but she shook her head and grumbled to the puppy as they slowly made their way back up the creaky stairs of the inn.
Maybe she liked having someone actually to be afraid of her. Huh?
She mused. Outfleak yipped at her answer. Whether it was agreement or not, the girl couldn't tell. Irinka had been reaching into her pocket for the key when the door to their room began rattling hard. Pulled it desperately from the inside, and the doctor's voice could be heard crying for his hound. The man alternated between claiming he could feel her, apologizing to the creature through broken sobs, and demanding the girl open the accursed door to let him see her. Outfleak shied away from the loud, raving noises, cowering behind Irinka's legs at the sound of her master becoming so unhinged.
Doctor, you're scaring her,
Irinka called back to him, safely outside of the room that she was near convinced housed 3 crazies.
Calm yourself, or I'm taking her and I will leave you to go mad on your own.
It was an empty threat. She knew it. She would never leave them while her brother was one of them. But Dr. Gascaris didn't know that. The man broke down into sniffling apologies and promises to be good if Irinka would just please let him see her.
Doctor, I want to hear you step away from the door.
She tried to reason with him, keeping her tone as calm as she could.
She is still very weak right now. If you push open this door, she will not be able to get out of the way fast enough, and you will hurt her.
She waited for a beat, listening to the harsh breathing and sniffling as the man tried to get himself under control.
Doctor, do you understand my words?
She asked, a thick lump caught in her throat because of the man's crying.
It will be all right, Nulam.
Nimue's faraway voice eased her friend after a long while of tense, almost silence.
The sooner you do as the mouse says, the sooner you will see your pup again.
The sniffles didn't stop, but the doorknob shifted when the man let go, and Irinka did hear him shuffling back and away from the door.
Come sit.
Nimue muttered disjointedly.
If you run at her, you will spook the poor thing. You will be sad all over again if you give her a heart attack.
Even Irinka grimaced at that one. It was incredibly indelicate, considering the doctor's condition, though it seemed to get the job done, because the sound the man made when he hit the floor was vaguely painful. With shaky fingers, and a hopefully calming pet to Outfleak's head, Irinka slipped the key into the door and opened it. It must have taken everything in the man to not run across the floor like some demented thing. He looked half crazed and unnervingly reminded Irinka of Trissy. The girl kept herself in the door, in case he made a run for it again, and watched when Outfleak cautiously stepped between her legs. The doctor began sobbing out apologies all over again at the sight of his beloved hound. Tears streamed down his dirty face, and even Nimue pulled away from him, as though his hysterics may be contagious. The hound, bless her, lay on her belly and slowly began crawling towards her master, afraid she may be the one to scare him. She stopped just out of the man's reach and sniffed the air, sneezing cutely when the stench of him hit her. Irinka felt for the poor thing. She had opened a window on their first day, but had had to lock it after the doctor had tried to climb out of it, adamantly insisting that he must return to the rose. Outfleak backed away slowly, before standing up and trotting over to the pile of bags Irinka hadn't yet managed to unpack. The pupper sniffed around them before whining and pawing insistently at Lunreth's. Irinka shot her brother a look, pleased to see that he had been monitoring the exchange closely. He had been back, but distant far longer. He was resigned to stay because the doctor had manic episodes where he became violent, and Nimue was more than willing to simply allow the man to kill her. Lunreth bore scratch marks from the fresh encounters just that morning, in fact. Irinka slipped her dagger from her boot and hid it behind her thigh before nodding at the man. Lunreth quietly shifted to his feet and went to open the bag. He let Outfleak go into it, nose first, and dig around until she came back out with an old journal in her teeth. Irinka watched the man frown confusedly, but opened it onto the floor when the hound dropped it into his lap. Together, they watched Outfleak's feathers begin to glow, and the pages began flipping themselves. Irinka couldn't see what was on the page the hound eventually stopped on, but her brother's face morphed into something of both realization, dread, and then hope. He pointed at the page urgently, and Outfleak yipped, her tail even wagging a few languid times. It surprised Irinka when her brother carefully tore out the page and scratched the pup behind the ears. He glanced over at their friend, who seemed to have entirely forgotten that his pet had been returned to him. The man lay on his side, curled into a little ball, muttering apologies to nobody just under his breath. Lunreth stood up slowly, moving just the same as he approached the insane man. He gestured for Irinka to help him, but she defiantly shook her head and knocked the doorframe. The sailor looked pointedly at Nimue, and, after a long moment, she sighed, but shifted to focus her attention on the doctor.
My friend, you need to stay still, all right?
She murmured to him, but his mind was elsewhere. Lunreth shifted around to crouch next to the man and lifted the torn page to touch the doctor's forehead. Instantly, the stench of burning flesh accompanied by a loud and angry hiss drowned out the unearthly scream that ripped itself from the doctor's throat. Irinka jumped in sheer terror, and Outfleak fled under the bed, but Lunreth and Nimue had pounced as though they had been expecting it. The woman had dexterously grabbed the man's flailing hands and pinned them to the floor above his head. The doctor's body bucked and his legs kicked out, landing a blow to Lunreth's ribs before the silent man managed to climb on top of him and sit on his stomach.
Close the damn door, girl!
Nimue shouted above the frankly demonic screeching coming from the thrashing doctor. Irinka snapped out of her shock and stepped quickly inside to slam and lock the door. She fumbled with the key and dropped it. She swore as she followed it to her knees in an attempt to find it in the dim light, and the smell of burning got stronger. Her hand closed around it just as the sound of hacking overtook the shrieking, and the woman shouted,
Take his arm! It's in his throat!
There was a bone-crunching thump when Irinka managed to get the key in the door, and a hissed curse before a muttered,
That will work too,
and then pitiful whimpering. Irinka turned back, just in time for her stomach to flip at the sight of Lunreth with a bleeding nose, and Nimue's entire fist jammed down the doctor's throat. A smaller squeak, a shriek pierced her ears, and then the woman swore.
Ah! Little shit bit me!
She yowled, and a bat the size of a wild apple finished crawling out of the doctor's throat. It hissed at the two who'd ripped it from its host's throat and took to the air. It barely made it a meter before Outfleak was on it. Irinka hadn't seen the hound leave her hiding spot, but the little rodent died in a puff of green smoke and the scent of roses between her vicious jaws. The doctor had gone limp beneath his handlers, and Nimue pushed Lunreth back to check the man's vitals. A sigh of relief vacated her chest before she gulped.
He's breathing. Lunreth, I would kiss you if you weren't covered in blood.
The man's face scrunched, and he waved off her comment, sitting back and letting his head fall against the seat of a nearby chair while clutching at the bridge of his nose.
The risk was that?
Arinka gulped, voice shaky and knees just barely keeping her standing.
How did you just perform an exorcism?
The former priestess finished for her, turning the doctor onto his side when the body began to heave and throw up acrid bile onto the floor.
Yes.
Outfleak crawled over to her master and licked his cheek tenderly.
Disgusting.
Nimue scolded the hound and pushed her away from the vomit.
Can you move the doctor to the chair?
The man eyed her, clearly annoyed, but sniffed and did as he was asked, heaving the man away from the mess, and laid his limp body over the sofa the woman had been lounging in when this whole mess had begun.
Thank you.
Dr. Gascares managed to mumble hoarsely. It was incredible. Even with his throat raw from screaming and other things, he sounded more lucid than he had in days.
All of you, thank you.
Hush, my friend,
Nimue murmured, brushing the man's hair back from his forehead and snatching up a handkerchief to wipe away the bile from his beard.
You must rest now. You can thank us properly later.
The man mumbled half in agreement, and it didn't take long for him to fall asleep, especially with Outfleak tucked up into his arms. There was no sound, save for the doctor's heavy breathing for a while, before Nimue broke her quiet with a soft,
"It stinks in here." You're only now realizing?
Arinka tentatively teased while Lunreth rolled his eyes.
None of you have bathed in weeks.
The woman almost glared at her before sniffing herself and grimacing.
I see. Perhaps that would be wise before I begin interrogating your brother about that charm.
Arinka frowned and stepped forward worriedly, though calmed when Lunreth simply gestured to his temples.
It's for headaches.
The girl translated.
Or interrogation.
Nimue studied Lunreth a long while before deciding that he was telling her the truth, as he knew it.
Whoever gave it to you lied,
she told him simply, picking up the paper. The marks of the scrawled symbols on it, now distorted by use but still vaguely visible.
This is not a charm against headaches. It's a glyph against possession.
Lunreth appeared just as shocked as Arinka at the declaration.
How did someone like you come across something as powerful as this?
The woman questioned, her earlier order of operations entirely forgotten.
Whoever made it has magic strong enough to topple that of a 400-year-old vampire. I know it wasn't you who made it.
The doctor groaned beside her and swatted weakly at the woman.
How am I supposed to rest when you are going on like that right next to my ear? At least wait until I have slept. I want to know too.
Arinka couldn't help the short laugh that broke out of her at the exchange, and the sense of relief at the familiarity brought genuine tears to her eyes. They were back, all of them. She would use whatever was left in the doctor's purse to pay off the cleaner to not ask questions, along with baths and a good hearty dinner to be bought up. He wouldn't begrudge her for it later. How could he, when she had brought back his faithful hound? When night fell, the small company pushed the beds together and sat in a circle, with Outfleak in the middle. The pup and her master clearly had a special bond that was good for both of them. She had grown back up to nearly her usual size, and her feathers no longer drooped with excess oil. Plates of cheese and fruit rested cushioned in the sheets, and mugs of the local ale made them all easy when they reached towards the dozing creature, slipping into Lunreth's mind as he began to tell his tale. This is the first of a few ellipses that shifts the story to a different time and place. Would you like to hear Lunreth's tale or not? As the divine judge likes to say, where you go is entirely up to you. If you would like to join the group in discovering the history of one of their own, Lunreth's tale spans chapters 27 through 30. If you decide you are not in the mood for a trip into the past, Snowflake in an Alley resumes in Chapter 31.